everybody, and welcome to episode 54 of On the Road with AutoTrader, where we make car stuff simple for Canadians. My name is Jody, and I'm the editor-in-chief of AutoTrader.
And my name is Dan Alika, and I am AutoTrader's road test editor. Why did you only say Jody this time?
Did I not say my full name?
I think that's a first. And It's such an easy, it's literally 7 letters, and you decided to skip 3 of them.
I'm all about efficiency.
Apparently. This is going to be a short episode, I think.
I'll just cut out every other word and all the vowels.
Sound good.
Welcome back, by the way.
Thanks. Oh, yeah, I was on vacation.
Yeah, you were on vacation for a couple weeks, so I haven't seen you.
Yeah. It was...
good trip?
Yeah, it was good. I got really sick, which was crazy. And twice. That's the worst part. So about halfway through the trip, I got like a cold, and it was, it wasn't great, but it was manageable. And then on the last day, like on our return leg, we were in the airport. We were like just about to board, and I just got like violently ill, and that continued like the whole flight home. It was traveling sick is not great. And honestly, like in years past, I've flown hungover before, and at least when it's like, when it's self-imposed and you know what you're getting yourself into, okay, fine. But this was like just totally out of left field and not a great way to end the trip.
Was it food poisoning?
I think so, because we went out for dinner like the night before, and Becky and I had like different entrees and whatever. I don't know. Anyways, it wasn't great, but I'm back now. It was a good trip. We drove around France. We had a Toyota RAV4, and it was interesting because it was a front-wheel drive RAV4 hybrid, which we don't get
We don't have that here
in Canada. Not that it changed too much. I mean, it was super efficient, but also the highways there most of them anyways, have higher speed limits than ours do.
Mm-hmm.
And I still averaged like both an indicated average and a manually calculated average of 6.4 liters per 100 with 4 people.
And all their stuff.
And, like so much luggage.
Oh my God.
So I was really impressed with the performance. And it was kind of like a nice little bit of, not that France is like crazy different, but that little like taste of home thing was kind of nice, right?
Yeah.
And being in such like a familiar vehicle.
That's so interesting that you were even when you're on vacation, you still take the time to do a manual fuel consumption calculation.
Of course.
That's the most Dan thing ever. I love that. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about EVs again. We talk about EVs a lot on the podcast because it is such a hot topic right now. Seems like every time we shoot, there's like something new that happens or some other commenter that really enrages us. But now, today we're going to be looking at why EV interest is dropping. And so AutoTrader does a lot of research, and they've recently come out with their latest EV survey, which talks about a whole bunch of stuff like why EV interest is dropping. And this is just from surveying, a bunch of Canadians and drivers and stuff like that. So there's a lot of info to go through, lots of interesting data, really interesting trends. And then also I wanted to talk about, we did this thing on our social media for March Madness, which you weren't here for because you were on vacation. And some of the results were super surprising to me. And like, this is obviously a lot less scientific than the other data we're going to be talking about, but really, really surprised. And I don't think you know the results. So I'm curious to see.
As somebody who doesn't have social media,
exactly,
it's not something that I'm aware of. Are we getting to that first or the EV survey?
Well, what do you want to do first?
Let's do the EV stuff first. And let's, I think we should, I don't want to like rehash everything that we've talked about in previous episodes, but it is important just to remind you guys that the federal announcement back in December of 2023 related to EVs that seems to be sort of like the spark that lit this fire. It is not new information. This 2035 mandate target for eliminating the sale of new gas-powered vehicles, that's not new. The announcement in December was in order to, make sure that automakers are providing the supply to meet the demand that is going to grow as we move towards zero-emission vehicles. So I just want to make that clear once again, especially if you haven't listened to some of the previous episodes. Now, I would encourage you to listen to them if you haven't. We've talked a lot about EVs, do they make sense? Where are we at with electrification? Why are they such lightning rods for insanity? We will get into a little bit of that with this, but this survey is very interesting. This is one that we've done for a few years now as a company. Barish, who's been on the show before, Tiffany Ding, who really kind of leads the charge, pun intended, on this EV research. They work really hard on this stuff, and it is, as Jody mentioned, like very scientific, very empirical with the results. But we're also going to get into a little bit of the more sort of anecdotal stuff, the factors that are maybe coming into play here that aren't directly tied into the research, but surely there is some overlap between what we're seeing in the market as a whole and what Barish and Tiffany and the rest of the team are seeing in this survey data.
Yeah, I think just to add some context, because it's one thing to see the data, but it's another thing to kind of dig into the reasons that might be, that might contribute to those results.
For sure. It's like I've talked about with you before, is like, JD Power does these new vehicle purchase surveys, and there's a few different kinds, but one of the questions that gets asked is what other vehicles did you consider, like the cross shop data. The difference between the cross shop data that we internally can analyze at AutoTrader versus JD Power, that's self-reported, whereas we're looking at anonymous but tracking user data. So we're seeing where people are shopping around. Like, let's say you're looking at a Honda Civic, and then we can say, well, these users then navigated to the Corolla, to the Kia Forte, whatever. Whereas JD Power is self-reported, so you get asked, well, what other vehicles did you consider? Well, if that was 90 days ago or even longer, you might not necessarily remember what you cross-shopped, but when you see a list of vehicles, you might go, oh yeah, I also considered this. Oh, I considered this one too. And I think that's what we're going to see, a little bit of that again, like anecdotal evidence where it's like, sure, we're getting these survey results that are showing, just to pull a number, like, so non-EV owner interest in purchasing an EV has dropped, to 68%? No, from 68, sorry, to 58%. I fully, obviously that's real, but where is the tie-in with this announcement? How has that played a role that people may not be admitting? And we're not going to ask that in our survey,
right?
But like, this anti-EV sentiment that has really, kicked into overdrive since December of 2023, just so happens to be right around the time that we're conducting this survey.
Yep.
It's top of mind for a lot of people, and all of a sudden everyone hates EVs.
Well, I also, before we just jump into the data, it's also, we're getting close to an election, right? And so you're going to be seeing a lot of issues being politicized from, different sides. And so I think that plays into it as well. But just diving into the data. So like you said, interest in EVs has dropped for 2 years in a row now. It kind of hit a peak in 2022. And our data, AutoTrader data, shows a direct correlation between gas prices and EV interest. Like, that makes a lot of sense to me. In 2022, right around the time where the Russia-Ukraine war started, gas prices went through the roof. And we saw on AutoTrader that interest in EVs also skyrocketed.
Yeah.
Because obviously people are tired of paying that much for gas, and you want to reduce your monthly, cost of operation. Not needing to pay for gas is great, right? And so, but why has it dropped from 2022 to now, to 2024?
I mean, so obviously, there are factors. Well, first let's get into the factors that, the results of the survey. So, 79% of people said limited travel range or distance. So basically, how far it can travel between charging. 68% cited the higher purchasing costs. Yeah, EVs tend to be more expensive than their gas-powered equivalents. That is, pretty apparent. And then 59% say that they think EVs are not suitable for, Canadian conditions come wintertime. So part of this, I think, I would love to see. I mentioned it on a previous episode, this idea of like an electrification czar and somebody that's really gonna, take that leadership role. I would like to see, automakers and interest groups leverage this stuff. I mean, I've talked about it before. I just went to northern Sweden. First of all, Sweden's climate, not so different than ours. Yes, it's a smaller country, so you can get rid of that 79%, range concern. That's not as much of a factor in Sweden. But as far as the climate goes, pretty lockstep between us and them. And not only did I drive, a Volvo EX30 on a frozen lake in northern Sweden in cold conditions, but like the take rate on EVs is way higher in Sweden than it is in Canada. It's like more than twice as high. And Sweden is 10 years ahead of us in terms of its targets for eliminating the sale of new gas-powered vehicles. 2025 is the target in Sweden for 100% new vehicles. 2035 is Canada's target. It looks like Sweden is on pace to achieve that this year. So just to give you guys an idea, this unsuitability for cold conditions, yes, EVs, they are affected by the cold, but so are gas-powered vehicles.
That's the thing that most people forget. A lot of the criticisms that people have about EVs, gas-powered cars suffer from the same issues, and I don't know why people don't put that together, right? When people are like, oh, I would never want an EV because, they're prone to explosions. I'm like, nah, it's not really statistically true, but so is a gas engine. Like, you're driving around with fuel.
Like, it is very bizarre to me, the factors, and this again is talking about stuff beyond this survey. But getting back to the survey results, is the most important factor cited in consideration was range. 67% of users surveyed said that range was the most important factor. 81% of those said that an EV would need to travel a minimum of 400 kilometers on a single charge in order for them to consider it. That is pretty consistent. We've seen that both in our internal survey data and some external surveys that we've seen over the years. That number is totally reasonable. The interesting one is now 34% are saying that they want a minimum of 500 kilometers, which is a number that I cite a lot, that I would like to see. Not that it's explicitly necessary, but I think it would help to get people over the hump.
I think it would make people a lot more comfortable, especially if they're in situations like you and I where we can't charge at home. 400 to me seems a little bit low, especially because I do so much driving. That would mean that I would have to charge like once a week, twice a week.
For sure.
And it's too much for me to handle without having home charging.
Now, speaking of, we should get into, and we talk a lot about how this issue has been politicized, but looking at like direct political, implications, the Ontario government eliminated the requirement in the Housing Act that new builds would have to be pre-wired. So not installed, not chargers installed in new builds, but the Housing Act, and I can't remember the exact name of it, but it had language in there that required developers to have, the proper amperage so that whether it's a condo or whether it's a house, you can have a level 2 charger installed. And the Ontario government quietly walked back that piece of legislation. So now that is no longer required. I read a story in the Toronto Star about this, that builders had cited, a cost increase of, and it was minimal. Like it was like $800 a unit.
Right.
And I'm like, come on, man. Like I understand that these are businesses and they're trying to, to maximize their margins. But like, if you could pass on to a consumer that $800 cost and charge $2,000 and use it as an upsell and say, hey, this thing's pre-wired, and you can blame it on the government. You can literally say, hey, it's not us. Like the government's making us do it. But like this to me is a huge failing. And I'm sick and tired of seeing, Doug Ford talk about how Ontario is going to be the EV capital of the world and nobody's going to be doing EVs like we are. Well, first of all, I mean, that's not true.
We're already very behind.
But exactly. It's like, sure, you can build as many EVs as you want, but if you're not selling them in your own backyard, what is the point?
Right.
And it really bothers me that, we're seeing, I don't have a problem with government incentives for these projects. I know that can be pretty controversial, but to me, it's like we're up against, so many U.S. states, that are vying for these same construction projects, these same factories that they want to see built. I would rather see those, built here. and sort of localize the supply chain, right? Ontario government likes to talk a lot about the Ring of Fire, which is this massive mineral deposit in northern Ontario that can, it can be home to extraction of all of these rare earths and minerals that we need in order to build EV batteries. That's great. Let's do that. If we're going to be extracting the minerals, let's then use them in these batteries, build them close to home. But if you're not closing the loop by selling those vehicles here, that to me is another huge part of this. And we talked about those macro factors. We've talked about, with gas prices and how that changes things. We've talked about interest rates have lowered proverbial interest rates in vehicles, right?
Yeah.
But like this to me is another one of those macro factors that doesn't get talked about a lot, is like, what is your incentive to buy an EV if you don't have the infrastructure at home and you know that your next home isn't going to have that infrastructure either? Then you're going to say, well, why would I do this? It's a pain in my ass to figure this out, and I can't charge at home, so I'm going to stick to my gas-powered vehicle.
I mean, that's the situation that I'm in, and I'm not like, I like EVs. I think they're great.
Yeah.
They're not perfect, but if I could charge at home, that would be a huge game changer to me.
For sure.
And so my condo board, we've been bugging them for years, but like, can you please look into what it would cost to get just a couple charging banks installed? Because my building has quite a few EV drivers. And they kept putting it off. And then suddenly they're like, okay, we've completed our initial assessment. If you want one, you're going to have to pay about $4,000 to $5,000 to have one. And at that point, I was like, okay, nobody's going to do that because that's way too much money.
See, I think that's reasonable.
Really?
Yes.
But in a home, it costs like what, $2,000?
No, but that's it used to be about $2,000. Nowadays, this is what happens, right?
Yeah.
It's now it's a business. You're having electricians and electrical companies that are capitalizing on this, but even still, $4,000 to $5,000. Again, I'm talking about if that is yours, if that is dedicated in your spot that you own, that you're going to one day sell with your unit, then that's equity built into your condo that your neighbors aren't going to have.
That's true.
Right? So to me, I always tell people that, like, I would budget $4,000 to $5,000 to have a charger installed, no matter what type of home that you have. If that's a level 2 charger, then that to me seems reasonable. But again, if we're not, as a province, if we're not mandating that infrastructure to be put in place in these housing starts, then what's the point in doing all of this?
Well, yeah, and we've said this before on the show that you can't leave it to corporations and businesses to make that decision on their own because it costs them money. So like, we do need the government to intervene in that case.
For sure.
But like you said, yeah, high interest rates and inflation really affecting Canadians' ability to afford the, extra, whatever, usually 20% higher price tag an EV has over a gas-powered model, like a comparable one.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of factors right now that make a lot of sense to me that kind of illustrate why interest in EVs have dropped. The interesting thing is that our data shows that interest in hybrids and plug-in hybrids has gone up. And so right now, people who don't own one, 62% would consider buying a hybrid, and that's up from 52% last year. And 60% would consider buying a plug-in hybrid, which is up from 54% last year. I think that's great news. I think hybrids and plug-in hybrids are kind of a great middle ground because you get some of the benefits of an EV with really none of the downsides.
Yeah, see, I'm still like, I'm so torn about it.
You're like all or nothing kind of guy, right?
Well, yes and no. It's just like, to me, the problem is, you've talked about this before, right? How many plug-in hybrid owners don't plug in their plug-in hybrids? And then again, what's the point? Especially because so many of them aren't as efficient as conventional hybrids if they're not plugged in. So it's just, to me, it's a loophole for people. It's a loophole for automakers. Sure, as part of these ZEV mandates, 2035, plug-in hybrids will still be able to be sold if they have 80 kilometers of range. Conventional hybrids will no longer be able to be sold new. Again, and it bears repeating because people still get up in arms. We're talking about the sale of new vehicles here. You can continue to buy used vehicles. AutoTrader is inevitably going to be chock full of used gas-powered vehicles, hybrids, plug-in hybrids, you name it. But new vehicle sales. Also, keep in mind, Canada does not exist in a vacuum. We're seeing these similar mandates everywhere. It doesn't matter where you're talking about. It doesn't matter whether it's a liberal government, whether it's a conservative government. This is just real. Climate change is real. Again, like I said, I don't want to rehash everything here, but it is important to note. But in that, in that context of like plug-in hybrids and hybrids, it's like, yeah, sure, it's better than nothing, I guess.
Yeah.
I just feel like the trouble with it is that this interest should have increased a decade ago. Instead, we're doing it now when it's like kind of too little too late, right?
Yep.
The pendulum has already swung. We're moving towards zero emission vehicles. I'd love to see hydrogen power become a thing. Maybe it will. We're seeing, in Alberta, that to me is an interesting thing that we're going to monitor kind of moving forward. Is Alberta really wants to put its eggs in the hydrogen power basket. It's going to take a lot because the infrastructure is lacking, but I'm talking about both for like commercial trucks and for, consumer like passenger vehicles. So it's interesting to see, but again, this is why I talked about having that person in the, in that head, like head of the table sort of thing, leading this transition, because we can't have a fragmented approach. It has to be a national approach to zero emission vehicles. If you're going to have, because once again, people that complain because, I don't know, apparently, half the province drives to Florida, because that's always one of the, how am I supposed to get to Florida now in an EV? And it's like, okay, cool. So let's pretend that 80% of people actually do that, which we all know isn't true.
Right.
But you're going to have that same problem with, if there's only hydrogen infrastructure in Alberta, then you're landlocked.
Yep.
You're not going anywhere because you can't drive into BC, because in the interior of BC, there aren't going to be hydrogen stations. And then on the other side, Saskatchewan isn't going to have hydrogen stations. So we really do need to be unified. And again, that's not about politicization. That's about like, why is nobody stepping up and just being like, okay, guys, here's the deal.
That's a hard job. I think
for sure.
that person, I'd never want to be that person, because they would be under so much scrutiny, but we need that person.
Somebody's got to, somebody's got to sort of fall on their sword.
Yep.
Because I mean, look at, this is now happening with Justin Trudeau, right? He's become the face of all that is evil when it comes to eliminating the sale of new gas-powered vehicles. And the thing that drives me nuts is like all of these people with kids and grandkids that are like, effectively, I don't care. And it's like, man, we're trying to, preserve a healthy planet and a healthy place for them to grow up in. And whatever the number is, 30% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions are attributable to ground transportation.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can eliminate that 30% GHG emissions, that is significant.
Yeah, and I don't think it's asking that much to be like, hey, would you mind trying an electric vehicle so we can prolong the life we have? I don't think it's that bad.
No, and I think, and I do have, productive conversations with people about it, just in the public, family, friends, Becky's family. We were out east and they were asking me a lot about it. So there's some like genuine, curiosity in people that don't know. Mm-hmm. And I understand. I also saw, when we were out there, I saw some hero on the Cabot Trail in a Hyundai Ioniq 5.
Cool.
And I'm like, good for you, man. Like that is a gutsy move. I was thinking about it when we were driving, and I'm like, I don't even know how comfortable I would be, driving around the Cabot Trail, like going up Cape Smoky. That's a big hill climb that, is going to sap a lot of energy. But it's like, so I understand people in that situation are going to be apprehensive, fearful of what it means for them. But again, without the infrastructure, and we're seeing that, right? When this is cited in our survey data and anecdotally, you see it, all over the place. People talk about it. So again, that's why we need that SAR. It's great to have the government offering incentives, and there are incentives on charging facilities, both at home and, commercial ones that companies can apply for. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about it before, how Tesla really is sort of ahead of the game when it comes to public charging, but we need more of that. We should be multiplying that by a factor of like 20 if we're going to achieve anything close to these targets.
Agreed. A couple more data points that I wanted to talk about here is that there is some good news because demand has decreased and inventory has increased. That means that prices have come down for both new EVs and used EVs, which is good. I think, EV pricing being what it is, that addresses one of the main reasons, according to our data, that people aren't interested.
For sure.
So now that those prices are coming down, I wonder if that would get a few more people interested. Now that they see, it's down 17.6% year over year for the new EV.
Yeah, and 11.4% on used. Like, again, this is one of those prime times. If you are, on the fence, if you've been thinking about an EV, or if you need a second vehicle to get the kids around to school, to soccer practice, to get to work, keep one gas-powered vehicle and then get an EV. My friends Jeff and Shannon are like the prime, and they are sort of telling me, life's expensive, and I get that. They've got 4 kids, which blows my mind every time I think about it.
Too many.
But they are perfect candidates for this approach where it's like, keep your Acura MDX or get a minivan and then get a smaller EV, something like a Kia Soul.
Yeah,
EV.
just to boot around town.
You get around town, there's enough space that you could get the kids around as well. And then, when you want to take your road trips or go visit family or whatever, load into the 3-row and off you go, right? So I think that seeing the prices come down the way that they have, both in the new and the used market, now's a good time. If you're a little bit apprehensive, get in now, because those prices, I can't say for sure, but are likely going to bounce back at some point,
right?
Before they drop again, right? This is a supply and demand thing. We're seeing it kind of on this small level right now. You're going to see it bigger in the future, right? As these numbers increase, as we get more EVs into the market, prices are going to come down as the technology, expands. And gets more affordable. That is going to be passed on to consumers as well. So you are going to see it. But I'm talking about right now in the short to medium term. Now is about as good as it gets in terms of getting, your an EV in your driveway while they're reasonably priced.
And don't forget, there's so many different types of EVs now. Most EVs these days have over 400 kilometers of range. Very few of them have over 500 now, though there's a couple if you're really looking for it. But yeah, it's a great time. Different body styles, different budgets. There's kind of something out there for everyone, which is nice to see, which didn't exist, 3 years ago. Totally. Even, right? So things change really quickly, and I think they're changing for the better, even though it's a little bit slow. I would like to see it change a little bit faster, but I'll take it. So before we head to our Ask an Expert segment,
yes,
you were away for this social media experience. So we did a March Madness style bracket where we put different pop culture cars against each other.
Okay. And
some of the results of this were super, super surprising to me. So we put Dom Toretto's Dodge Charger from Fast and Furious.
Like the first
one against the Toyota Supra.
Okay.
Which one do you think?
From Fast and Furious?
Yeah, the first one.
Supra would.
That one did win. Yeah. Okay. We also put the Ecto-1 from Ghostbusters against the DeLorean from Back to the Future.
I would say the DeLorean, but I feel like the Ecto-1 would win just based on sort of the way that people that's more. Ghostbusters is more kind of topical.
Yeah, because it's a current franchise, right? Yeah. So you're wrong. The DeLorean won. We put
shout out to Carl Bonner, a little Irish.
He loves pointing that out.
Okay, yeah,
he really does. Okay, the Mystery Machine from Scooby-Doo versus the GMC Vendura from
the
A-Team.
Oh my gosh, it's got to be the Mystery Machine.
It was, but only by a little margin. Okay, this one I was surprised with. The Batmobile versus the Barbie Corvette.
Barbie.
The Batmobile won by a huge margin.
Wow, that surprises me.
Especially considering how timely the Corvette is.
Well, that's all that's the only reason I would say that. Outside of that movie coming out, I would have said Batmobile all day, but I thought, because this isn't a survey of car people.
Well, it's a survey of the people who follow us on Instagram, which could be anybody. But
that's what I mean, right? You get I think it would be a more diverse, respondent group. But anyways.
This one was interesting too. So the Aston Martin DB9 from James Bond, the original like Sean Connery.
Yeah.
And then the Lotus Esprit submarine from James Bond. Do you remember that one?
Of course.
Okay, so which one do you think won?
Well, based on your reaction, I'm going to say the Lotus, but it should be the Aston Martin.
It is the Aston Martin.
Okay, thank God. I was like, I probably would have left right now if the Lotus won.
I mean, the Aston Martin is just so iconic, right? You can't go wrong.
That Lotus is on display somewhere in Vegas, I believe. Some like.
Didn't like Elon Musk buy it at one point or something?
I don't know. If that's true, I'll leave.
Okay, don't leave. We're not done the episode yet. Okay, Lightning McQueen versus the Mach 5 from Speed Racer.
Lightning McQueen.
Yeah, that one won by a big margin. Okay, and then we have the Mutt Cuts van from Dumb and Dumber versus the Woody Wagon from National Lampoon.
Well, that's called a family truckster.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't know about
My
this
mistake.
Woody Wagon.
It had wood paneling on it.
Yeah, but it was the family truckster. I maybe the Dumb and Dumber.
Yes, Mutt Cuts won that one just because it's so ridiculous, right? Okay, and so
sorry, hold on. Before you go on, do you remember who the salesperson was who first sold Chevy Chase's character on the family truckster? Who was the one who was in the dealership who sold the Griswolds, the family truckster, before the first, so the first, National Lampoon's Vacation, when they did their road trip to go to Wally World? Do you remember who played the salesperson?
It's at the tip of my tongue, but I won't remember because it was so long since I've seen it.
It's Eugene Levy.
Oh my God, I love Eugene Levy. I should have known that.
Well, here we are.
Now I know. So after all these brackets, which car do you think came out on top? This really, really surprised me.
Maybe that Supra.
So the Supra was one of the finalists.
Okay.
The Supra was up against Lightning McQueen to take the full win.
Oh, and then Lightning McQueen,
McQueen won. You're not surprised by that?
No, because it's like so, like people.
I mean, I love that movie. I love Cars,
Never
the movie.
seen it.
Of course, because you don't watch movies. But I
that
thought
doesn't
for sure the
surprise me.
Supra would have won.
No, because it's like that one is I think, once again, it's like that hits for so many different people.
True.
Non-car people, parents.
True.
They recognize that, whereas they might have never seen Fast and Furious movies, and so it made. And that was that orange Supra, like as sort of iconic as it is. That was only in like the first movie, I think, right?
Yeah, that's true. Lightning McQueen had a bunch of. How many Cars movies did they had? 3?
Jody, this is like, this is the universe knowing that we were going to talk about this today. Yesterday, I was too far away, so I couldn't tell if it was a Subaru BRZ or a Toyota 86 or Scion FRS. But anyways, I saw one of those Toyobaru, I hate that term, but those sports cars, done in a full Lightning McQueen wrap last night.
That's so cute.
Literally less than 24 hours ago.
I love that.
So
the universe knows.
Here we go.
Before we head to our Ask an Expert segment, here is a message from your friends at AutoTrader. Can't find a car at your ideal price point? AutoTrader is the answer. Car prices are dropping across Canada, and AutoTrader has got you covered with hundreds of thousands of cars for you to choose from. Use our price badges to find a great deal at a great price today. Visit AutoTrader for more. Today's Ask an Expert comes from Richard from Ottawa.
Hello, Richard.
I pointed out to a friend who has a 3 Series about BMW drivers not using turn signals. Without skipping a beat, he said it was a $300 option and most BMW drivers didn't check the box.
That's hilarious.
That wasn't even a question. It was just a statement.
That's some good self-deprecating humor, It's like when a BMW driver knows that BMW drivers don't use their turn signals.
Yeah.
I respect that. Richard, please send our best to your friend. That's hilarious.
That's pretty funny. We have another question from George from Ajax.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm shopping for new all-season tires for my RAV4, and there's so many options and price variations. Do you have any tips? Thanks. Love the show.
Thanks, George. Look, my tip, it's hard because like you said, there are so many options out there. But my advice is pretty simple. Don't cheap out, man. That honestly, and I'm not necessarily saying buy the most expensive tires that you can get, but it really is one of those situations where you get what you pay for. And when it comes to where the rubber meets the road, quite literally, like that is one area that I would not skimp out. So I would be looking at like a name brand tire for starters. And then I would also look at, I'm assuming if you're buying all seasons, I'm assuming, or I hope that you also have winter tires. But that means that you can look at something that's maybe a little bit has a lower rolling resistance if it's for what did you
A
a
RAV4.
So something that's going to be a little more. I'm not saying like a summer tire, but something that has a little bit more of like that performance, because all seasons can be a little bit compromised. Like they try to be too many things to too many people. So if you get some, or you can get one of those, like one of those e-tires where it's like supposed to be a little more efficient. But again, I would just say don't skimp out. If you have any, questions about specific tires and want to know how Jody and I feel, you can email us again at expert@trader.ca. Throw a couple different ones at us, but I would just, that's my number one piece of advice for tires.
Thanks, Richard and George, for your questions. Again, like Dan said, if any of you have questions that you would like to ask, you can email us at expert@trader.ca. Before we sign off, please make sure to subscribe to the AutoTrader YouTube channel. Make sure to follow AutoTrader Canada on Instagram and TikTok. And also, if you found the podcast helpful, please subscribe or share it with a friend or leave a review. It would be really awesome if you did that. And drive safe, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.